Slightly cleaner maybe, but what the hell is that? What the hell is that? Well, it's finally time to start looking at this M52 B28 engine ready to fit into the E30. And today we're going to start with stripping off all the ancillaries and giving it a really good inspection to see what needs to be done before I can actually fit it into the engine bay. If you've been following along with the build so far, you'll know I fitted my E90 brake booster, which is key for this swap, in the previous video, and I subsequently decided to put brake fluid in it and get it all bled up, and I'm pleased to report there are no leaks and the pedal feels good. So I'm glad to have got that out of the way, because the thought of trying to get those lines bent with this lump in the way in the bay sounds like a nightmare. So advisable to do that first. And you may have noticed I've rearranged the workshop a little bit to shuffle the E30 over to the side to make room on this side of the garage for this engine work that's about to take place. The E30 even got rolled out and saw a bit of daylight for the first time in a long time, and I'm very happy with my paint colour choice. Out in the sun it looks spectacular. Can't wait to see what the whole car will look like painted, but that's down the line. For those of you that missed the first episode in the playlist, I'll give you a little bit of a backstory on this M52. I actually purchased it a couple of years ago from a guy called Adam, who's on the Downshift channel, which is well worth checking out. It was actually destined for his E30 project, but subsequently he's decided to go S54, understandable, and he had to move this on. So after asking a few questions about it, me and the old man shot up one evening and collected it. Unfortunately, Adam said he'd never seen this engine running, but he had purchased it from a friend and he does seem to have his head screwed on, so I have good faith that it'll be okay. Also, it does turn over by hand really sweet, and what I've been doing is I've been putting a bit of oil down into the chambers and just keeping it rotating every so often, just to make sure it's not going to seize up in storage or anything inconvenient like that. The keen-eyed of you will have noticed that it's already got the E34 front sump oil pan on it, which is really convenient. I believe the engine was used in an E30 build before it was removed and then sold to Adam. Sadly, I did notice quite early on that there was a crack in the sump around the sump plug, so I whipped it off and took it to a guy who welded it up for me, and it looks a bit Frankenstein, but it's definitely sealed. I suspect it was cracked because these engines sit notoriously low when fitted to a lowered E30, so they end up catching speed humps. On the note of E34 sumps, I actually spotted this come up for sale locally, so went and picked it up at a good price, and it's actually a modified E34 sump. As you can see, it's been modified to extend to keep the same capacity but trim off the depth so that you're less likely to hit it on speed humps. I'm currently unsure of which one I want to use. Maybe if you've got any experience of this, you might help me out by letting me know your thoughts in the comments. But I'm a bit worried that when driven hard, because the sump's depth has been reduced, I might end up starving the engine of oil where it needs it most because it can't feed the pickup consistently enough. But I don't know if that's just a problem I've made up in my head or whether it's a serious concern. If you have any knowledge on that, please leave a comment and do let me know. Hopefully I'll have reached a verdict on that sump in a later video, but for today, let's focus on the plan, get these ancillaries removed, and peer into the engine to see what the combustion chambers and the valves and the bottom end look like. Hopefully we won't uncover any horrors that lead me to do a full rebuild. And right on cue, here are the reins. So with the E34 sump off, we can see that it has the correct E34 front sump pickup, which looks in good condition actually. But I can see that there's quite a lot of varnish in here, which is always a little bit worrying to see. It makes you think the car might have not had as many oil changes as I'd have liked it to. And the windage tray is in place, which is good to see, and it looks like it's the original windage tray that this engine had, because it's had the supports cut off it, which would have been for example, if this was an E36 with a rear sump, this would have supported the oil pickup that would have spanned across here. Another note whilst the sump is off, looking at the oil pump sprocket, these nuts have a tendency to back out on you, and when that happens, obviously your engine stops being fed with oil from the pump, so it's terminal. Now, a lot of people like to upgrade these with one that's got a hole drilled in and a wire lock that locks it to the sprocket to just prevent it from backing out. This one looks completely original, not been modified, which I suppose is good and bad news really. I will intend to put a locking one on. Turning the engine over a few times, it all moves very smoothly, and there's no swarf or strange things floating around in here, which is really great to see. Now, I don't really know how many miles are on this engine. It's from an E36, so I'd probably estimate around 100,000 miles. I don't know if this amount of varnish is about normal for an engine with 100,000 miles or not, but it all seems to look quite original and in good condition, other than the fact it's all a bit yellow. The only part that's not yellow is the only part that's modified, which is the E34 pickup. Everything else seems to be quite even. Giving all 6 bearing caps a wiggle, the ones on the end of the conrod, they all have a slight amount of play. To be honest, the expected amount of play, considering that they're a bearing and they go around the crank journals. Also to note, none of them have any discoloration or appear to have been very hot at any point. They're all very even. I did notice earlier that the crank, as it comes through the rear main seal, does look blue. And I was thinking, well, it's a sign of it being very hot, that, which is worrying. If it had been very hot, I'd have expected to see the caps in this area also being blue and very hot. But from a little bit of Googling, it seems to be that you can expect these to be blue, because when they manufactured, they are actually heat treated to harden them. I don't think it's unreasonable for me to be using this bottom end just as it is. Now, if it was an S54 or something like that, I would definitely be changing the rod bearings at this point, but it's not. It's much lower stakes than that, being an M52. Now, if you are an engine expert and you're seeing anything alarming, please do leave a comment for me so I can not miss it. And with that, let's flip this engine back over and start looking at the top end. Inlet side to inlet side, I think. Looking at the top end and turning it all over, I'm really pleased with the condition. Very similar to the bottom end. I don't think this has ever been apart. All of the caps are all numbered correctly and in order. The leading edge of the cam lobes seems to be in good condition, not showing any wear. These lobes aren't showing any real scoring or pitting of any description. This engine has hydraulic lifters rather than solid ones. There's no point in getting the feeler gauges out and trying to measure valve clearance or anything like that, which you would be doing if it was an S54. I do suspect that when it does start up for the first time, it'll be very tappy and clacky because it's not had oil pressure for a very long time, this, and those lifters end up getting quite gummy with age and they need warm oil running through them. Other than the cams, looking over at the timing chain, it all seems to be in good condition. The chain looks in good nick. The tensioners are present and correct and seem to be tensioning. I haven't found any fragments of plastic tensioner floating around anywhere, which is good news. And the Vanos, it's very hard to know if there's an issue with this Vanos without hearing the engine running. Even if you strip it down, a Vanos with a known issue, you can quite often see no real visual evidence that there's a problem. So I think it'll be very hard to say either way with this until I've heard it running, and I'm not planning to strip it down just for the sake of it. So the next thing I want to do is look down the intake and exhaust ports using this old boroscope. This is actually the cheapest one on eBay that you could have got in like 2010 because the old man's cheap. So it really is potato vision on this, so we'll see how we go. Hopefully we'll see enough to know whether the condition's good or bad. Let's pull these tissues out and start peering in. So starting with the exhaust side, we're going to have a quick look into the valves here and see what we can see. So this would be piston number 1, and to be honest, looks quite clean. Let's look into number 2. Very similar. Number 3, bit wetter in this one. Number 4 is looking okay as well. Bit of a mark on number 5. And number 6. Another mark in there, but doesn't look like anything too concerning. Bit of a tide mark on that one. Right. So from what I can see of the exhaust valves looking down the exhaust ports, I'm actually pleasantly surprised with what I'm looking at here. What I was looking for really is any issues in the form of inconsistencies between them, any damage, any sign of burning, or any build-ups of carbon. And other than them looking a little bit greasy around the stem seal area, which to be honest, an engine of this age, that looks quite healthy to me. Other than that, they all look good to go. So what I'm going to do now is get around the other side and let's have a look into the intake ports, but so far so good. Very dusty in there, looking down into number 1. Even dustier in number 2. Stems are shiny though. Blade of grass in this one, which is unusual. Number 4, bit cleaner. Number 5. And number 6. Well, the intake valves to me look as good as new, which is really great to see. And again, on the intake side, really consistent. The only thing that is bothering me a bit is there's quite a bit of debris in these, but it looks like just general workshop storage debris. So even though I've had tissues into the intake runners, I suspect it spent some time sat about in a workshop open, and that's why there's lots of bits of crap, even bits of grass, very strange, sat down in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fire up the compressor and see if I can blow some of that out, just to avoid it sitting in there and eventually getting sucked into the engine on first start. But the news is very good news so far. Valve's looking really good. So the next thing I want to do is whip the plugs out, see what condition the plugs are in. Might give us some indication of how it was running before it was packed up. And then hopefully we can look down at the top of the pistons with the boroscope while we're at it and get more confirmation on the condition. Looking at the spark plugs from cylinders 1 to 6, again looking very consistent, and comparing it to the charts you find online, they seem to land in the normal range, so I'm quite happy with that as well. I'm going to replace these spark plugs. They'd look a bit mucky, to be honest, mostly above the cylinder, so it can't hurt to switch them out, but I suspect this is a sign that the engine was running healthily before it was pulled out of the car. Right, now I'm done being entertained by the infinity mirror, I'm going to have a look down into the bores so we can see the tops of the pistons and hopefully the walls. This is cylinder number 1, let's see what we can see. 1 and 6 should be at very bottom at the moment, so we'll look at those two first and then we'll rotate the engine and look at the others. Now let's look at 6. Slightly cleaner maybe, but what the hell is that? Looks like a little corner of plastic off something. Might be part of the rocker gasket actually. Looks very clean other than that. Let's turn it over and look at some others. So now we're looking at number 2. Looks really clean in there. Let's look in number 5. Surprisingly clean again. Right, rotate the engine a bit more. Another third of a turn should put 3 and 4 at the bottom. Like that. So now looking into number 3. That white thing's a bit weird. few blades of grass like the inlet had. Other than some debris, like in the inlet, looks clean again. Number 4. Four looks spotless, really. Right. So there was a bit of debris in 3 that looked like it had come in through the intake, and there's this in 6, which is definitely a little bit of plastic, which is unusual to find. I thought it might have been metal before and I was a bit more concerned, but it's definitely plastic, and I have a good theory on where it's come from. I think there's a good chance the part of the rocker cover gasket, the part that goes around the top of the spark plug tubes, because when I took the rocker cover off, I could see it was disintegrating, and it seems to add up with what I'm looking at here. This is the bit I mean, and this is mummified basically. It's really stiff, tearing, and definitely need to replace it. And I think it's a little chip off this that's dropped down. Maybe somebody took the rocker off at some point when there was no spark plug in and it just dropped down. So looking at the top of all 6 pistons, they actually look remarkably clean to me. I'd have expected some carbon build-up for an engine of this age, especially one that's, you know, quite varnished at the top and bottom end and looks like it's probably not had as many oil changes as it should have. To me, it looks very unlikely that they've ever been replaced. They must be in original condition. There's no marks on any of the nuts and bolts that imply this engine's ever been apart. And there's no marks on top of the piston that would imply the pistons have ever been cleaned. So I think it's just a healthy engine. Now, it would have been really nice to be able to see the bores, but with that crappy boroscope, sadly it's just not possible. I really should invest in a better one, to be honest. But hey ho, looking at the condition of those pistons, I'd hope the same would be true for the bores. So now I'm going to move on. I'm going to whip off the thermostat housing and hopefully the water pump, and we'll see what lays beneath those. Right, well the nuts came off easily enough. So the way this is supposed to work is you've got these 2 ears which are threaded holes. You thread bolts into those and tighten them up, and what it does is it puts pressure on to pull the water pump out of its home. Now, remembering how hard this was to do after those ears snap off, which is inevitable, when I was doing the M40 engine, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat this right up to just give myself the best chance possible. But so I don't destroy this crank position sensor, I'm going to remove that first. To the shopping list. Casualty number one. Well, this one's working. I made a mistake of using too weak a bolt to force this water pump off. They're 4.6 and this one snapped before it even reached the point where it was pressing against the housing. So it's worth noting that if you're going to do this, you use a decently strong bolt. This does look to be an original BMW water pump, which is good to see, although pretty sure that's a plastic impeller. And I will hopefully be replacing it with a metal one because I know these do fatigue over time. But it's good to see genuine parts have been used when servicing this. The thermostat housing looks good as well, so not bad at all. I'll make sure to use quality replacements. There was probably nothing wrong with them in reality, but better to be safe than sorry. Looking into the block, into the coolant galleries, there is like a light orangey white corrosion dust, but there's no big chunks or massive amount of fur or any plaques that look like they're blocking it. Sometimes you see these and they're really horrific, so looking into there, it looks to me like decent coolant's been used for this whole life of the engine. Well, I think it's been a very successful day inspecting the M52 engine, and I haven't seen anything that's making me think this engine won't just run, so that's really great news. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of you thinking that I'm insane for considering throwing this engine in as is and not taking the whole thing apart and doing a full rebuild whilst it's not in the car. And I am very, very, very tempted to want to take the head off and do just that. But if I decide to do that, it's going to push getting this as a running car so far down the road that it's probably into next year. And I have ideas of getting it in the car and getting the car as a runner as soon as possible. And of course, once it's in the car and hopefully running, I can find out what needs doing, and it doesn't stop me from taking the engine back out and giving it a full and complete rebuild down the line. What I can see, and what we've looked at today, all looks in remarkably good condition for an engine of this age and probable mileage. I am going to replace all the standard wear items and service parts on this engine before it goes in, just to, you know, give it a fair start. But other than that, I think I'm going to give it a cosmetic refresh, which will probably be the next video, and get ready with fitting all my new parts onto it, get ready to put it in the bay and start trying to find out if it'll run like I think it's gonna. So I've put myself together a little shopping list, which will probably total more than I spent on the entire engine, amusingly. And I will get all of that ordered, and then in the next video I should be cleaning this and hopefully painting it up and making it look, from a cosmetic standpoint externally, pretty much brand new. So make sure you subscribe and join me for that. If you've seen anything that's really stuck out to you and you're a bit of an expert on this, make sure you leave me a comment, because I do miss things, it does happen. But either way, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.